Hello everyone, this is Sidutru Continue, Part 12. The question is, during the different holiday celebrations, do you have to have sex or dance around naked under the moonlight to perform ceremonies and rites? Sure, if you're a fetish freak, clothing or the lack thereof is not making you more or less spiritual, but it is definitely opening you up to the possibility of getting a really nasty cold, bit by a mosquito in places you don't want to get bit, and just more or less providing eye candy for somebody else under the illusion of spiritual adherence. The fact is that was pretty much a mix of three different ideas, and that came from Gerald Gardner. And it was mixed on one, seeing a bunch of people in Africa scantily clad, because for one thing, they live in the fucking desert and they don't look at it the same way that other cultures do that wear their clothes. Okay? The second is, he was a frickin' nudist, and he got kicked out of the nudist colony before, and we can only imagine why. And three, it had a lot of mixed elements of the so-called fertility rite, which was basically justifiable ritual sex as an excuse to get laid, and then claim some kind of magical whatever, and things being done to and on the women that were involved in it, which is where some of the other problems came in and why that group fell apart. Because it is true, the women were being treated like fuck toys under the illusion of a fertility rite, and being expected to do things that include everything from masturbating in front of him while he watched, and if they didn't allow him to fuck them. And that's the kind of people you want to take your advice from? Whatever. He was also a homophobe, so Wicca was not gay friendly, nor was the so-called occultism he was creating. He was a pig. He was a pig that had a fantasy of trying to look like Pan, and was trying to basically create his own fantasy of him being Pan, chasing all the naughty nymphs around, and scoring now and then, and playing the role of the seducer and calling it fertility rites. And that's just a real harsh bitch slap reality. And that's where Doreen Valiente really had her real issues. And then she went out of her way to create her own shit of basically anti-male version speech in a lot of her works, and just couldn't let go of her own baggage. And when you can't let go of your own baggage because of a bad experience you had with douchebags, instead of just laying at the feet of the douchebags in question, it completely clouds your judgment and everything else. And frankly, on one point, I'm disgusted by a lot of the stuff that Doreen Valiente wrote. But on the other part, when I read her stuff, I feel like I'm reading a mix of trying to create a spirituality out of anger, and combined with somebody who was essentially ritually sexually abused. And that's really what I see in her works. And so on one point, I don't like her because of how she presented it, but I also felt sorry for her because of what motivated her to that. So even I can be understandable of some of the psychological factors without pulling any punches about it as well. But that is not the kind of people that you want to trust with anything. And think about all these people. Think about all these founders. Really investigate them. Look what they were into, what was done to them, who was all involved with them, what some of the other people did to themselves. themselves. What most people don't understand is that one of the former members, including Alexander's, one of the former members, I can't remember the guy's name offhand, he was the first one to try and create an order called the Order of Tudor King. Essentially, he was pulling into the dark, sinister, satanic thing. He was constantly depressed, and he eventually committed suicide. And his little movement obviously went kaput because he couldn't get it off the ground. And a bunch of others decided they would pick it up later and make it their own and basically plagiarize this dead guy, and that's how that got started. So it was basically, at that point, internal politics, a lot of nonsense, and a whole lot of fake shit. Sort of like Raymond Buckley's so-called picture rooms type bullshit, when Hicks did not have rooms. And there's very little left behind of them, and by the time anything about the Picts was actually realized, they had already long since converted to Christianity. And ceased to exist as an identity. And this was before the whole so-called impose and sort of cross nonsense. So there's really not much known about them either, other than a few scant references here and there, and a lot of romanticism and King Arthur type myths. So there you go. The other question is, are we enemies of God? Why are we so critical of Christianity? We're not. But a lot of your fanatic Christians are critical of anyone that doesn't fit in with their very limited knowledge, and they don't even know 90% of their own scriptures anyway, which is what they don't understand. And when I'm saying they, I'm talking about the fanatics. For those of you who are Christians that might be looking at this wanting to understand more about this yourself, I don't have a problem with you if, you have your faith, you have what you have embraced as what motivates you to get up in the morning, do good things, and basically go with the basics of the positive teachings. And that's not wrong. That's not wrong at all, and I have absolutely no problem with that. I have a problem with those who are browbeaters, who basically say things like, warlocks are devil worshippers. Anything to deal with warlocks and witches is satanic and from the pit of hell. And if you want to spend eternity in hell, keep doing that shit and saying those lies. Then you get the other people that make comments like, it may or may not have been from God or God inspired. Unless we find out in the end times. But all these other, weird sidestep stuff, whatever. Then you get some of the others that throw in weird shit like Master of Witchcraft, Voodoo, Occult, Spells, Curses, Astral Projection, and Jesus. No. It's just this back and forth stuff that's got to stop. The other thing that is rather laughable is when somebody makes comments like, well, I believe warlocks and witches are real, but I thought they're not supposed to expose themselves. Depends on what you mean by expose yourself. You're confusing again occult nonsense and psychobabble that's been wrapped up and And occultists basically taking whatever title suits them so that they can continue to manipulate people with all the other psychobabble and nonsense that goes with it. Real warlocks and witches, even in ancient times, were known by their community. They lived with those people. They grew up with them. They were their friends and their family members. And so they obviously knew, like in any other clan or tribal society, knew these people, what they were, and they did call them by warlock or witch, and understood that it was a title of high respect and honor, and they themselves were always cautious to keep their eye out for fakes. And there's a lot of stories about legitimate, honorable warlocks and witches being ready to go up and fight the deceptions being employed against their own immediate family members, basically the baddies, you know, and the loonies. And it wasn't always, you know, casting spells like swords and sorcery type bullshit. But later writers embellished it that way to make it look like something it wasn't. Or they just completely misunderstood every single fucking thing that was being said, or intentionally chose to misunderstand it. Now, here's the other thing that's kind of funny. People say things like, well, I don't know where these Christians or whatever get off saying that the warlocks and witches are from Satan or of the devil because, you know, I'm a member of this Wicca thing and we can't be devil worshippers because there is no devil. Because you didn't happen to go back and look at some of the concepts that were written in the original shit that basically said there is no devil because the devil and God are one and the same, and that was some of that crazy shit that was pulled off by the parodying cult of the so-called Church of Satan. That's just a symbolic or figurative speech. Whatever, people. We, as warlocks and witches, know for a fact, just by looking at anything, turning on the news, walking across the street, and seeing some fucked up shit with normal everyday people, that evil does exist, and often wears many masks. And it comes in the form of people mostly. Mostly. But then again, you go back to my earlier videos here, and you go back and consider and contemplate what I was saying about Orloga, Mirta, and Wahas. But anyway, ultimately, no, there's no dance around naked, there's no literally worshipping of the moon, and when a lot of original warlocks and witches were looking at the sun, moon, stars, we were looking at that to figure out the fucking seasons. And when to plan the next time to move, migrate, hunt, harvest, and track as much as we could and pass it down through history so that we could look for patterns in environmental changes so that we could basically predict what would be a probable outcome in the future. Basically, it was old world meteorologists, your weather guys. On to the next video.